Notes are out in DLive. If you're not in DLive, if you're somewhere else, go to PATRIOTSoapbox.com. Go to Big Tech underneath the Shows tab. Up here, left corner, menu, hit Shows. When you hit Shows, you're going to see all the show banners. Boom, boom, boom. And go to Big Tech. And you can get to the archive notes here. Archive under Read, Watch, Think for Yourself. Big Tech show notes. So we left off on section 20 here in this document, and this document is the gateway process. And this has to do with this idea of training brainwaves and training brainwaves, syncing the left brain and the right brain together, get them to resonate certain frequencies at certain amplitudes in order to unseat your consciousness and move it into the general consciousness field and into and through other dimensions. Interdimensional communication and the implications of that, let your mind wander. And this is a military report written by the Army back in 1983. And it discusses consciousness as energy, makes correlations to quantum mechanics and this idea that there's a universal energy field at rest, and there are multiple dimensions that are energy in motion, and the interrelationship between the universal energy field at rest and these other dimensions in motion make up our reality. And so we're going to do a little review on the time-space dimension, which is our dimension, and then move forward through this document. This is the third episode of Big Tech that we are spending time looking at this document. We are taking our time in order to make the necessary correlations that are required, most of which dance around this idea of Big Tech being able to map and understand what's going on with your body and your electrochemistry, basically. The tools that are available, that are marketed to us as fun little toys, and then the potential as it relates to being able to interact and manipulate your consciousness with things like electromagnetic fields. So I'm gonna kind of back off of that. I think this episode, if you need some refresher on that, then I'll post these on my YouTube channel, and I'll post them on the website that I'm building soon. Underneath the media section, if you go to humaninternet.org, there is a section that's called live broadcasts. I'll take you through the media section here real quick. The media section has many different components. There's 5G and radar, Wi-Fi, ultra wideband, commentary or videos on beamforming and modulation. I'm adding to this. I haven't put CRISPR and gene editing technology in there yet. That will be coming. Nanotechnology, kind of the same thing. Bioenergetic medicine and bio-machine interface. These are full. And this is very interesting stuff. If you have the time to watch it, I encourage you to do so. But if you go to the live broadcasts, you'll see what I've been doing since YouTube really started censoring the Soapbox channel. And there's a link here to Cyberhuman Frontiers. It's another show that I do on the weekends with Indy. And we get into a lot of the same content. And because there's two of us, the approach to the content is very different. It's more interactive and not more and not so much of a single narration. So I encourage you to go to Cyberhuman Frontiers, because you will get a different take on the same information. And we just did an episode on this topic a few days ago, one day ago. We're at 999 subscribers. If you're not subscribed to Cyberhuman Frontiers, I encourage you to do so. Once a week, 2-hour show. Like I said, it's with two people, so the approach is very different. And I like teaming with Indy very much. PatriotSoapbox.com, Big Tech Show you can get to here, and the playlist for the Big Tech episodes that I've begun to upload on my own takes you to my internet or my YouTube channel. And they're all here, all the way back to decoding the nervous system with electromedicine, nano, micro technology, quantum satellite key distribution, DNA resonance, nerve stimulation, brain Q technologies using electromagnetic fields to steer and grow brain cells, resonate your nervous system, regrow nerves, 5G and COVID-19, epigenetic switching, protein phenotype switching and manipulation using 5G, Huawei, 5G and human bond communication, signals intelligence and treason, violation of Fourth Amendment privacy. And this was focused on Facebook using backscatter communications where they don't even need to use the battery in your phone to turn on your microphone and your camera and access your contacts and your email. They don't have to do any of that. They can just pull the ambient radiation out of the environment, power your device, use your device for recording purposes or whatever, and transmit it back to Facebook. So that's there. That's a real interesting one. Biometrics and Nielsen, the TV ratings company, well, they're into a lot of cool stuff like emotion recognition and using social media applications to understand your physiologic response to anything you're looking at or doing in your environment. There's an episode on that. Wi-Fi surveillance, 5G surveillance, understanding your biometrics and your emotions using wireless energy transmission devices, ultra wideband, that's coming out in all your new phones, iPhone, and ultra wideband in the new Samsung phones, for example. There's an episode on that. Quantum initiative from the White House, $2 billion over the next 10 years. From the White House to the national laboratories and to universities for quantum science, quantum information, the quantum internet that's going to be running in parallel with the 5G networks. The Mind Has No Firewall. It's an interesting document. I read that. Voice of God technology, non-lethal technologies, and then Russian, Soviet, Czechoslovakian parapsychology, which is really the roots of some of the roots of what it is we're talking about, or we're going to be talking about tonight, as it relates to this bioenergy that emits from us and our consciousness, and what does it mean? Why are we here? And then dancing around this idea of potentially communicating interdimensionally. Biophotonic communication, quantum mechanics, and then I took the MAGA Ask About Chips and Vaccines and Regeneron. There's a 30-minute video on that, where I kind of break down the cybernetic infrastructure in a nutshell. So it's a pretty interesting one. So live broadcasts on humaninternet.org will get you going in the right direction. One more page just to show you what else is here in the media section. Human transformation, neural interfaces. These are talks that are given by other people that are leaders in their industry from either DARPA or the Silicon Valley, and or have moved on to other industries, where they talk about brain-computer interfaces and then material sciences that are being designed to fuse man and machine together. It's all here. Well, a lot of it's here. And then augmenting the brain with artificial intelligence. MIT, 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 MIT. All these speakers here are from MIT discussing AI in the brain. So, why AI in the brain? What's this push for the brain, right? And in my view, what we're really dancing around here is this idea that humans have now unlocked and now understand to some extent the difference between our dimension and other dimensions. And you can liken that to the spirit world or whatever. Angels and demons, whatever you want to try to liken that to. And this idea that our brains are very special, unique biologic computers that have the ability to interact with time and space and beyond time and space. And we are biologic. We are not silicon. Our brains are mobile, unique, independent, quantum measurement devices, quantum computers that are able to tap into these other dimensions if you know what you're doing. So on that note, time and space dimension. Up to this point, our discussion of the gateway process has been relatively simple and easy to follow. Now the fun begins. Gateway involves more than just perception of those aspects of the universal hologram, which can be accessed in the dimension of time and space as we know it. So they're talking about our dimension being a hologram. You've heard Elon Musk and others talk about, you live in a hologram, our reality is a hologram, this is just a simulation. Well, this was written in 1983 from an individual lieutenant colonel in the Army, military intelligence. To explain how and why human consciousness can be brought to transcend the limitations of time, space is the next task which must be addressed. To do this, we must first appreciate what time and space are in order to understand how the dimension that they constitute can be transcended, moving out of our dimension. Physicists define time as a measurement of energy or force in motion. In other words, it is a measurement of change. However, in order for energy to be in motion, it must first be limited in some way within the confines of some sort of vibratory pattern, vibration, so that its confinement gives it the capacity for being contained at a specific location, which is distinguishable from other locations. So our dimension relative to time and space is this idea of energy that is confined into a known position that then can be measured when it moves out of that position or change positions in order to establish time. And that is what they're defining our dimension as. Energy vibrations that are confined, that are observable to be in one place and then change shape, orientation, or move to another place, space-time. Just vibration and energy, that's all we are. That's all we are. Energy which is not confined is force without limit, without dimension, without the limits of form. It is infinity, cannot move because there is nothing beyond infinity, and is therefore outside the dimension of time. It is also beyond space because that concept implies that a specific energy form is limited to a specific location and is absent from other locations. But if energy is in the state of infinity, there are no boundaries, no here to differentiate from there, no sense of area. Energy in infinity means energy uniformly extended without limit. It has no beginning, no end, and no location. It is conscious force, the fundamental primal power of existence without form, a state of infinite being. Energy in infinity is said to be completely at rest and therefore cannot generate holograms so long as it remains utterly inactive. It retains its inherent capacity for consciousness in that it can receive and passively perceive holograms generated by energy in motion out in the various dimensions which make up the active universe. So, universal consciousness field that is at rest is able to receive and perceive energy in motion, which is measured by time, right? Out in the various dimensions which make up the created universe, the active universe. Energy in this state of inactive infinity is termed by physicists as energy in its absolute state, or simply the absolute. Between the absolute and the material universe in which we experience our physical existence are various intervening dimensions to which human consciousness in altered states of being may gain access. Theoretically, human consciousness may continue to expand the horizons of its perceptual capability until it reaches the dimension of the absolute, at which point perception stops, because the absolute generates no holograms of or about itself. Intervening dimensions. Since the absolute is conscious energy in infinity, meaning without boundaries, it occupies every dimension to include the time-space dimension in which we have our physical existence, but we cannot perceive it. It overlays everything, as do many of the intervening gradients or other dimensions through which the energies of the universe pass on their way to and from their home in the state of infinity or the absolute. Interesting. To enter these intervening dimensions, these other dimensions, human consciousness must focus with such intense coherence that the frequency of the energy pattern, which comprises the consciousness, meaning your brain waves, can accelerate to the point where the resulting frequency pattern, if displayed on an oscilloscope, would look virtually like a solid line. Achievement of this state of altered consciousness sets the stage for perception of non-time-space dimensions because of the operation of a principle in physics known as Planck's distance. This is an aspect of quantum mechanics which applies to the fact that any oscillating frequency, such as a brainwave, reaches 2 points of complete rest, which constitutes the boundaries of each individual oscillation, movement up or movement down. So, points of rest in a brainwave. I'm going to show you a brainwave pattern just as a refresher here. Images for a brainwave pattern. So what they're getting at here is every time the brainwave goes up, there's a rest point. Every time it goes down, there's a rest point. It rests at the top, it rests at the bottom. It rests at the top, it rests at the bottom. Rest at the top, rest at the bottom. What they're saying is when it's at the point of rest, either at the top or at the bottom, you're in that infinity state. You're in that dimension that has no boundaries. What do they call that? It's escaping me. The absolute. So for a brief instant, every time your brain waves are oscillating at the point of rest, whether they're at their high point or their low point in their output, in their oscillation, you are in the absolute, constantly in contact with the infinite universe, if not just for a blip. So we are here. Without these points of rest, the oscillating wave pattern would be impossible, since the points of rest are required to permit the energy to change direction, going from up to down, and thus continue vibrating between rigid limits. But it is also true that when, for an infinitesimally brief instant, that energy reaches one of its 2 points of rest, it clicks out of time-space and joins infinity. That critical step out of time-space occurs when the speed of the oscillation drops below 10 or 0.10 with 33 zeros after it. So 0.10 with 33 zeros after it. We enter, in effect, a new world. To return to our case in point, the human consciousness wave pattern reaches such a high frequency that the pattern of clickouts comes so close together that there is a virtual continuity in it. Then a portion of that consciousness is actually postulated to establish and maintain its information collection. Interesting. The consciousness, your brain, when it's clicked out, and the click outs are so close together that there's that flat line on that oscilloscope they were talking about. They're saying that your brain, your consciousness, is collecting information in those dimensions located between time and space and the absolute. So what this document is talking about is using the gateway process to train your brain to oscillate, the left brain and the right brain resonating and oscillating together in a known, repeatable way, and then elevating your brainwave pattern so that your brain waves click out fast enough to be coherent or to be congruent, and keeping your consciousness outside of our dimension, our time-space dimension, in other dimensions and the absolute, which is the infinity energy field, and then collect information out of those dimensions. Now, what happens when you come back? Do you remember? I bet with training it's possible. Or with the advancement in brainwave measurements now, they probably could just hook you up and go through this process, and they're literally using human minds to interact and read other dimensions. Well, there's a lot to be said for that, because if they can put you there, can they take those other dimensions and bring them here? Is that forwards and backwards compatible? Is technology far enough along whereby we've mapped enough of the other dimensions to be able to tap into them and then convert them into our normal brainwave patterns through a computer translator? And then I ask you, what does a mechanized form of demonic possession look like? What does a mechanized form of demonic possession look like? Thus, as the almost continuous click-out pattern establishes itself in continuous phase at speeds below Planck's distance, but before reaching the state of total rest, human consciousness passes through the looking glass of time and space after the fashion of Alice beginning her journey into Wonderland. The gateway experience, with its associated Hemi-Sync technique, is apparently designed, if used systematically and patiently, to enable human consciousness to establish a coherent pattern of perception in those dimensions where speeds below Planck's distance apply. This holds true irrespective of whether the individual is exercising his consciousness while in his physical body, or whether he is doing so after having separated that consciousness from the physical body, the so-called out-of-body state mentioned earlier. Subatomic particles. The behavior of subatomic particles provides an interesting example of the phenomena of clicking out, discussed in the preceding paragraphs. In an article prepared for Science Digest magazine, Dr. John Gleedman mentions the way in which subatomic particles communicate with each other once their energy fields become entrained as a result of colliding with each other. The communication concerned is, of course, postulated to be occurring during the click-out phase in the oscillation of the energy fields comprising the subatomic particles concerned. It is this cause which accounts for the cross-communication at what, in terms of space-time velocities, would seem to involve speeds in excess of light. In reality, Einstein's theory of relativity is not being invalidated, but rather the communication concerned is taking place outside the dimension of time-space to which the theory of relativity is strictly confined. Specifically, Dr. Gleedman tells us quantum theory postulates a kind of long-range Siamese twin effect whenever two subatomic particles collide and then go their different ways. Even when the particles are halfway across the universe from each other, it says they instantaneously respond to each other's actions, and in so doing, they violate relativity's ban on faster-than-light velocities. Indeed, regarding attempts to quantify what is known about the behavior of energy in dimensions apparently outside of time and space, Bentov speaks about courageous physicists who are working on hypothetical particles called tachyons, which can move at speeds higher than light. The speed of tachyons start just above the speed of light and range all the way to infinite velocities. So what they're really talking about in this paragraph is quantum entanglement, whereby two photons are generated, they interact with each other. It doesn't matter where the photons go. If you measure one, you know the other. If you manipulate one, the other also changes. And it's done so instantaneously. And what they're getting at in quantum mechanics or quantum theory is that the communication occurs between the two entangled photons, two entangled particles, in the other fields outside of space-time, in the absolute, if you will. And it's measured at the subatomic particle's point of rest. So whatever the vibratory frequency, whatever the oscillating frequency is, when it's in its up or its down cycle, it has to be at a point of rest before it changes velocities, before it changes trajectories from up to down or down to up. At that point of rest, it's in the other dimension. It's in the absolute or a combination thereof. And when it's there, they are also connected. And when it's there, it doesn't require or doesn't obey time. Time does not exist in the other dimensions. So it doesn't have to obey general relativity. That's what this paragraph is saying. Quantum entanglement doesn't matter where they are. The quantum love story. Dimensions in between. Now that we have postulated the legitimacy of the assertion that the energy forms which compose consciousness can move beyond time, space, dimension, we need to turn our attention to the energy forms. We'll get back to this in a minute. Energy forms inhabit those dimensions between time and space and the absolute. In so doing, we may better perceive the form that reality assumes when we encounter it in those intermediate dimensions. Whoa. We're going to stop. I want to read that again because that kind of blew my mind. I'm reading this with you in real time, at this point in real time for the first time. So let's look at this chart. The absolute infinity. And when you look at something that has a vibration or an oscillation, it's up and then down and up and then down, and what you see here is an energy oscillation wave. And when it gets to the highest point, it's in absolute infinity. And when it's in the lowest point, it's in absolute infinity. And what they're getting at here is Planck's distance. Anything below 0.10 with 33 zeros after it, centimeters, is considered this measurement point of a click out portion of the oscillating energy in intermediate dimensions, which means that anything below 0.10 with 33 zeros after it, centimeters, puts you in this click out range, which means there are multiple dimensions that are in this band on the downswing and on the upswing. Very, very interesting. And the middle part here is the portion oscillating energy pattern in time-space, our dimension. You have these other dimensions in the bands above and below our dimension that are at distances smaller than 0.10 with 33 zeros after its, centimeters, and with respect to measuring it before it gets to a complete and total rest and you're at absolute infinity, which is a universal energy field. That being said, let's go back and read this piece right here. The dimensions in between, which is what we just looked at right here. Dimensions in between. Now that we have postulated the legitimacy of the assertion that energy forms which compose consciousness can move beyond time and space, we need to turn our attention to the energy forms which inhabit those dimensions between time and space and the absolute. So these bands right here, above and below our dimension, the click out, what they're noting here in this table as the click out. In so doing, we may better perceive the form that reality assumes when we encounter it in those intermediate dimensions. So humans encountering a reality in these intermediate dimensions outside of our dimension that we define as time and space. And these dimensions that are in existence and in motion that aren't yet at the absolute infinity, which is the universal energy field at rest that is able to measure and perceive and receive information from any other dimension that's in motion. And what looks like here, a lot of them aren't our dimension. they are above and below our dimension. So, reality in these other dimensions outside of space and time, above and below ours. In this context, Bentov tells us the causal relationship between events breaks down. Movements become jerky rather than smooth. Time and space may become grainy or chunky. Perhaps a piece of space can be traversed by a particle of matter in any direction without necessarily being synchronized with that piece of time. In short, a pair of events will occur in either time or space, the pair not being connected casually, but by a random fluctuation. What Bentov means is that inside the dimension of time-space, where both concepts apply in a generally uniform way, there is a proportional relationship between them. A certain space can be covered by energy moving in either particle or wave form in a certain time, assuming a specific velocity virtually anywhere in the time-space universe. The relationship is neat and predictable. However, in the intermediate dimensions, not our dimensions, beyond time and space, the limitations imposed on energy to put it into a state of oscillating motion are not uniform, as they are not in our physical universe. A myriad of various distortions and incongruities are thus likely to be encountered, such that our nice, neat assumptions concerning the relationships between time and space as we know it in this dimension do not apply to the other dimensions. But even more important, access is opened to both the past and the future when the dimension of current time-space is left behind. I'm going to read that sentence again. But even more important, access is opened to both the past and the future when the dimension of current time-space is left behind. Things that make you go, Special status, out-of-body experience. Although human consciousness can, with enough practice, move beyond the dimension of time-space and interface with other energy systems in other dimensions, the entire process is appreciably enhanced if that consciousness can be detached in large measure from the physical body before such interface is attempted. Detaching consciousness from the physical body before interfacing with these other dimensions. Just want to, what does that look like to you? Once an individual becomes proficient in the technique of out-of-body movement and then reaches the point where he is able to break out of time-space while out of his body, he gains the advantage of clicking out part of his enhanced consciousness while starting from a base located much closer to the dimension with which he wishes to communicate. Whoa. I'm going to read that one again. Once an individual becomes proficient in the technique of out-of-body movement and then reaches the point where he is able to break out of time-space while out of his body, he gains the advantage of clicking out part of his enhanced consciousness while starting from a base located much closer to the dimension with which he wishes to communicate. In other words, since he is starting from a point much higher up, to use an analogy from the time-space context, that part of his consciousness involved in clicking out will have that much more time to interact in dimensions beyond time-space because less time is required to traverse the intervening layers, the intervening dimensions. Moreover, once the individual is able to project his consciousness beyond time-space, that consciousness would logically tend to entrain its frequency output with the new energy environment to which it is exposed. therein greatly enhancing the extent to which the individual's altered consciousness may be further modified to achieve a much heightened point of focus and a much refined oscillating pattern. As a result, a self-reinforcing process should ensue whereby the farther consciousness in the out-of-body state can be projected beyond the time-space dimension, the more its level of energy output would be enhanced, thus promoting the potential for still further travel. The tentative conclusion to be drawn is that the out-of-body state may be regarded as an extremely effective way of accelerating the process of enhancing consciousness and of interfacing with dimensions beyond time-space. If the practitioner of the gateway technique has a choice of concentrating on achieving and exploiting the out-of-body experience as opposed to concentrating his full efforts on expanding his consciousness exclusively from a physical base, the former would appear to promise much faster and more impressive successes than does the latter. So this paragraph is literally saying that people can train themselves to tune to a specific dimension and stay in that specific dimension and travel further once they're trained, basically getting their own consciousness out of their body, out of this dimension, and staying in these other peripheral dimensions outside of our space-time reality. Whoa. Absolute in perspective. So the absolute, right? This universal energy field at rest. It may be helpful at this point to pause and recap the major aspects of our intellectual journey from time-space to the realm of the absolute. We have spoken at some length concerning the incredibly complex hologram, which is created by the intersection of energy patterns generated by the totality of all dimensions of the universe, ours, time-space included. We have noted that our minds constitute energy fields, which interact with various aspects of this hologram to deduce information, which is ultimately processed through the left hemisphere of our brains to reduce it to a form that we employ for the process we call thinking. We have implied that this hologram is the finite embodiment in active energy form of the infinite consciousness of the absolute. It is the title we assigned to that vast pool of energy in a state of perfect rest over which the physical universe is layered and from whence it comes. Incidentally, to describe this, Bentov uses the analogy of a very deep sea, comparing the still depths of the sea to the dimension of the absolute while assigning the storm-tossed waves above to represent the physical universe with which we are familiar. The slightly agitated currents of the sea to be found in between the turbulent surfaces and the totally still depths represent energy in the process of either going into rest, approaching infinity, or coming out of rest, moving into the storm. From Big Bang to Torus. Working from the widely accepted Big Bang theory, Bentov presents a conceptual model to depict the process of time-space evolution, the relative position of the universal hologram. That hologram is often called a torus because it is thought to have the overall shape of an immense self-contained spiral. Basing his thesis on recent studies concerning the distribution of quasars, quasi-stellar objects, and operating on the premise that in the universe, smaller processes tend to be mirror images of larger ones, i.e. the pattern of electrons around the nucleus of an atom mirrors the way planets orbit the suns, and so on. Bentov postulates the following scenario. Taking his cue from the observed capability of quasars to eject enormously concentrated beams of matter from their interiors in a controlled, non-concentric version of the Big Bang, he envisages a similar process occurring in the generation of the universe. Noting that those galaxies located to the north of our own galaxy are moving away faster than those located to the south, and that those to the east and west are demonstrably more distant. Bentov regards this as substantive evidence that the jet of matter, which expanded into our universe, has turned back upon itself, eventually forming an ovoid or an egg shape. He sees matter in our universe entering the ovoid pattern following ejection from the nucleus composed of extremely compressed energy through a white hole. At the end of its trip to the far end of the ovoid, he sees it departing via a black hole. In such a model, time is observed to be a measure of the change which occurs as energy evolves into new, more complex forms as it progresses along the distance from the white hole side of the nucleus around the shell of this cosmic egg until it enters the black hole. In other words, as energy expelled from infinity and confined within limits by the conscious of the absolute achieves form and motion following ejection from the white hole at the top of the egg, time begins as a measure of the cadence of this evolutionary movement as reality goes around the shell of the egg on its journey to the black hole at the far end. Photograph of a quasar emitting a jet of matter. And this stuff is like what they study at CERN and other particle colliders. They're looking at these subatomic particles and understanding what they do. And they're, in this case, they're making reference to one of them, a quasar, sort of kind of being a miniaturized micro example of what's happening in the macro in our universe. So there's the white hole and the black hole, and energy is being ejected out and basically being in our dimension, right? White hole to black hole. And it's the same thing, a toroid. So you have two things happening above and below, if you will. A point where flow of time, space turns towards opposite pole of ovoid. So it's coming out, and then it's flipping around and coming back around, and it's going into the black hole. Out and around and a black hole. Out and around and a black hole. So what they're saying is this looks like the universal consciousness field, and here's the hologram, us. And diagram of the cosmic egg. Stylized rendition of a simple torus. Looks a lot kind of like DNA, huh? This stranded stuff that's wavy back and forth. It's coming out and around and back. Out and around and back. Out and around and back. Our place in time. The observed distribution of galaxies suggests that our particular universe is located near the top of the egg, at the point where matter begins to fall back on itself, thus explaining the reason why the galaxies to the north are seen to be moving away more rapidly as they are caught up in the downturn of the stream of matter towards the far end of the cosmic egg. Layered over this cosmic egg is the absolute, which sustains the radiating nucleus from which the original jet of matter issued forth. As the stream of matter moves around the ovoid towards its destination at the black hole, will be reabsorbed into the radiating nucleus and then the absolute. It generates the interference pattern within the cosmic egg, which constitutes the universal hologram or torus. Since the torus is being simultaneously generated by matter in all the various phases of time, it reflects the development of the universe in the past, the present, and the future, as it would be seen from our particular perspective in one phase of time. By reflecting on this model, it becomes possible to see how human consciousness brought to a sufficiently altered state could obtain information concerning the past, present, and future, since they all exist in the universal hologram simultaneously. In the case of the future, because all of the consequences of the past and present can be seen coming together in the hologram, such that the future can be predicted or seen with total accuracy. Moreover, it is possible to see how the implosion of energy patterns would cross and recross to create an incredibly complex four-dimensional hologram or torus in a spiral shape in reflection of the multi-dimensional developing pattern of evolution. All of the movements of the energies which comprise the universe leave their mark and hence tell their story throughout time. Quality of consciousness. We noted earlier that the out-of-body state involves projection of a major portion of the energy pattern that represents human consciousness, so that it may move either freely throughout the terrestrial sphere for purposes of information acquisition or into other dimensions outside of space-time, perhaps to interact with other forms of consciousness within the universe. Consciousness is the organizing and sustaining principle that provides the impetus and guidance to bring and keep energy in motion within a given set of parameters so that a specific reality will result. When consciousness reaches a state of sophistication in which it can perceive itself, its own hologram, it reaches the point of self-cognition. Human beings have this form of elevated consciousness, as does the Absolute. But in case of the latter, it is a function of energy and its associated quality of consciousness in infinity, omniscience, and omnipotence in a perpetual unity. When energy returns to a state of total rest within the Absolute, it returns to the continuum of consciousness in the pool of limitless, timeless perception that resides there. Thus, the more complex an energy system in the material state, the more consciousness it possesses. The more complex the energy system in the material state, the more consciousness it possesses to maintain its reality. Our consciousness, therefore, is that differentiated aspect of the universal consciousness which resides within the Absolute. It accounts for the organization of the energy patterns which constitute our physical body, but is distinctly separate from and superior to it. Since consciousness exists quite apart from and outside of reality, beyond the bounds of time and space, it, like the Absolute, has neither beginning nor end. Reality has both a beginning and an end, because it is bounded within time and space. But the fundamental quantum energy and its associated consciousness is eternal. When reality ends, its constituent energy simply returns to infinity in the Absolute. That is some really deep stuff right there. That is, anyway, my mind's going to eternal life, life after death, heaven, hell. How would people try to explain this last paragraph 2,000 years ago as it relates to our consciousness being independent from the body and that there is something out there that we're connected with beyond space and time, and that our bodies here are just temporary vessels to understand and be in this dimension. And we are limited by it, yet we are enhanced because of it. We have the ability to feel. We have the ability to perceive self, to understand our own existence while here in our bodies. But our consciousness is separate from our bodies, which you could equate to a spirit or a soul that is tied into a universal family. Consciousness in perspective. Having ascertained that human consciousness is able to separate from physical reality and interact with other intelligence in other dimensions within the universe, and that it is both eternal and destined for ultimate return to the absolute, we are faced with the question, so what happens then? Since memory is a function of consciousness and therefore enjoys the same eternal character as the consciousness which accounts for its existence, it must be admitted that when consciousness returns to the absolute, it brings with it all the memories it has accumulated through experience in reality. The return of consciousness to the absolute does not imply an extinction of the separate entity which the consciousness organized and sustained in reality. Rather, it suggests a differentiated consciousness which merges with and participates in the universal consciousness and infinity of the absolute without losing the separate identity and accumulated self-knowledge which its memories confer upon it. What it does lose is the capability for generation of independent thought holograms, since that can only be done by energy in motion. In other words, it retains the power to perceive, but loses the power of will or choice. In exchange, however, this consciousness participates in the all-knowing infinite continuum of consciousness, which is a characteristic of energy in the ever-present. Consequently, it is accurate to observe that when a person experiences the out-of-body state, he is in fact projecting that eternal spark of consciousness and memory, which constitutes the ultimate source of his identity, to let it play in and learn from dimensions both inside and outside the time-space world, in which his physical component currently enjoys a short period of reality. Wow. I'm kind of speechless right now. I almost want to read this again. We're just going to read it again. This is ridiculous in a good way. It's very, very interesting. So here we go. Consciousness. Having ascertained that human consciousness is able to separate from physical reality and interact with other intelligence in other dimensions within the universe, and that it is both eternal and destined for ultimate return to the absolute, we are faced with the question, so what happens then? Since memory is a function of consciousness and therefore enjoys the same eternal character as the consciousness which accounts for its existence, it must be admitted that when consciousness returns to the absolute, it brings with it all the memories it has accumulated through experiences in reality. The return of consciousness to the absolute does not imply an extinction of the separate entity which the consciousness organized and sustained in reality, meaning your memories. Rather, it suggests a differentiated consciousness which merges with and participates in the universal consciousness and infinity of the absolute without losing the separate identity and accumulated self-knowledge which its memories confer upon it. What it does lose is the capability for the generation of independent thought holograms, since that can be done only by energy and motion. In other words, it retains the power to perceive, but loses the power of will or choice. In exchange, however, this consciousness participates in the all-knowing, infinite continuum of consciousness, which is a characteristic of energy in the ever-present. Consequently, it is accurate to observe that when a person experiences the out-of-body state, he is in fact projecting that eternal spark of consciousness and memory, which constitutes the ultimate source of his identity, to let it play in and learn from dimensions both inside and outside the time-space world in which his physical component currently enjoys a short period of reality. What are the implications of this? That you are a unique, sentient, conscious entity while you're here. And when you move on, if you go back to the absolute, that being one possibility, because there are other dimensions along the way, you keep your memories and your experiences, but you lose your free will. You become part of a general consciousness, a universal consciousness when you go to the absolute. They don't talk about what happens in the other dimensions. Do you keep your free will when you're there? Because you're still in motion. The absolute is the only energy plane, the only consciousness plane whereby everything is at rest. So you are part of everything, yet you don't interact, you don't create any action. You basically perceive and receive information. You don't transmit information. You're not able to exercise free will in the absolute. But what about the other dimensions? You're still in motion. And then the question becomes, can you function in more than one dimension at the same time? And if you can, who do you serve? What are you doing? What are we doing here? Because this is a dimension of matter. This is where we build things like hadron colliders, particle colliders, quantum internet infrastructure, electromagnetic systems that envelop and overtake natural existing ones, tying into the universal ether, interacting with biologic machines. That is the human. We are biologic machines, but we are independent and sentient. We have a consciousness, a spirit, a soul that has come from the absolute, has been ejected out of the absolute at the moment of conception into this time-space dimension to do something. Whatever it is that's out there, God or otherwise, picked you to be here because you are a unique consciousness. While you are here, you're able to exercise free will. You're able to understand self and perceive consciousness and reality, form memories, potentially access memories. What are ancestral memories? What's really going on with your DNA, your genetic information that's passed on one generation to the next, the epigenetic switches that occur, the genetic memories that are encoded through things like being successful or going through trauma. Those things imprint in your DNA. They change and flip epigenetic switches. That is a physical writing of information into your genetics that you then pass on to your offspring. And whatever consciousness you are blessed with, should you have children, gets that data in their genetics to then access and tune into, or use that information to tune into the universe and this absolute energy field. So if you believe that when we're done here, we go somewhere else and we're making our way back to the absolute, that point of rest, and that we're sentient and we keep our memories and we then become part of the large library that is infinite consciousness, then we are all brothers and sisters amongst each other and amongst your families. At a universal consciousness level, you are a brother and a sister to your mother and your father, your cousins, your children, your neighbors, because we all come from the same place. We're just energy. The gateway method. Having put the gateway experience in context by postulating a structural outline of how and why it seems to work, and having shown what it is designed to achieve, the time has come to examine the specific techniques which comprise the gateway training process. These techniques are designed to enable the user of the gateway tapes to manipulate the high energy states which can be achieved if the user continues to work with the tapes over a period of time. The amount of time required to reach advanced energy states and to fully exploit the technique varies with the individual. The sensitivity of his nervous system, his general state of mind, and the extent to which he may have previously developed facility in related techniques, such as transcendental meditation, are all pertinent factors affecting the speed at which he may expect to progress. The gateway process begins by teaching the individual participant to isolate extraneous concerns in a visualization device called an energy conversion box. Next, the participant is introduced to a method of encouraging his mind and body to strive to achieve a state of resonance through utterance of a single tone, a monotonous, protracted humming sound that sets up a feeling of vibration, particularly in the head. He engages in this resonant tuning, as it is called, by humming along with a chorus of such sounds that are contained on a gateway tape. Following this, the participant is exposed to the gateway affirmation and is encouraged to repeat it to himself as he hears it repeated on the tape. This affirmation is a statement to the effect that the individual realizes that he is more than merely a physical body, and that he deeply desires to expand his consciousness. Hemi-Sync introduced. After that, he's exposed for the first time to the Hemi-Sync sound frequencies and is encouraged to focus on and develop a perception of and appreciation for those feelings which accompany the synchronization of brainwaves that results. Next comes the technique of progressive and systematic physical relaxation, while the Hemi-Sync frequencies are expanded to include additional forms of pink and white noise designed to put the physical body at the virtual threshold of sleep, as well as to calm the left hemisphere of the mind while raising the right hemisphere to a state of heightened attentiveness. Once all of this is achieved, the participant is invited to envisage creation of an energy balloon comprised of an energy flow beginning at the center of the top of the head and extending down in all directions to the feet. The energy involved in this flow then proceeds up through the body, back out into the balloon pattern again. The energy balloon, which sets up a pattern very reminiscent of the cosmic egg discussed earlier, not only enhances bodily energy flow and encourages early achievement of a suitable resonant state, but it is also designed to provide protection against conscious entities possessing lower energy levels, which the participant might encounter in the event that he achieves an out-of-body state. What? It serves a precautionary purpose in the unlikely event the participant's first out-of-body experience involves direct projection outside the terrestrial sphere. Whoa. So let's look at this again, because this was it's a little interesting here. So the Hemi-Sync, right? You sit there and you hum, and then you repeat these affirmations that are on this tape, right? And then you get your body in tune into resonance, and then you get the pink noise and the white noise, and while you're in resonance, it's walking you up to a certain vibratory pattern, and you're creating this energy balloon around you, whereby you're focusing on pushing energy up and around and down, enveloping your body to your feet, and then back up through, let's say, your spine, your chakras, back up to your head, and you're cycling this energy around you like a force field. And it says it not only enhances bodily energy flow and encourages early achievement of a suitable resonant state, but it also is designed to provide protection against conscious entities possessing lower energy levels, which the participant might encounter in the event he achieves an out-of-body state. So they're talking about intelligent, conscious entities that exist in these other dimensions that are potentially harmful. Okay. So, advanced techniques. Having reached focus 10, the participant is now ready to endeavor to achieve a state of sufficiently expanded awareness to begin actually interacting with dimensions beyond those associated with his experience of physical reality. Just want to note here that they said dimensions, plural, that are associated with your experience of physical reality. More than one dimension to be experienced in your physical reality, more than one. Anyway, this state is called Focus 12 and involves conscious efforts on his part, while additional forms of pink and white noise enter the sound stream, being directed into his ears from the gateway tape. Once the participant has achieved this state of greatly expanded awareness, he is ready to begin employing a series of specific techniques or tools, as the Monroe Institute characterizes them, which enable him to manipulate his newly found expanded awareness to obtain practical, useful feedback of value for promoting self-discovery and personal growth. The specific techniques involve are described individually below. Problem solving. This technique involves identifying fundamental problems which the individual wishes to see solved, filling his expanded awareness with his perception of these problems, and then projecting them out into the universe. In this way, the individual enlists the assistance of what Monroe Institute calls his higher self. In other words, his expanded consciousness to interact with the universal hologram to obtain the information required to solve the problem. This approach may be used to solve personal difficulties, technical problems in the realm of physics, mathematics, etc., practical administrative problems, and so on. Responses to problem-solving techniques may be received almost immediately, but often they come based on developing intuition over the next 2 or 3 days. Unbelievable. Frequently, the response comes from in the form of a sudden holistic perception in which the individual suddenly finds that he simply knows the answer in all of its ramifications in a complete context. Sometimes without even being able to put his newly found perception into words, at least initially. In some cases, the responses may even arrive in the form of visual symbols, which the individual will see with his mind while he is in the focus 12 state, and which he will have to interpret after he returns to normal consciousness. So, I'm thinking things like dream interpretation, or those of you that research or read or meditate, focus on anything with any kind of great intensity. To have intuition occur, to see things or different possibilities, and then to work through those in your subconscious, occasionally bringing them to your conscious over the subsequent days to then ultimately come to some conclusion or some realization. I think what they're talking about here happens to us naturally. It just doesn't happen in a on-demand, repeatable kind of a way, at least in the manner that the military is looking at, being able to have projects and programs and objectives that groups of people can on demand pursue, like dropping into these other dimensions and performing some function or task or receiving some type of information, and then coming back and over a period of time being able to provide useful, tangible information to people like the military. This is pretty cool. And the reason I'm pausing here is because I'm personally kind of struck by this. And it's really this simple. With the research that I'm doing, I've spent there a long period of time, like years at this point, hours a day, looking at specific types of information and reading it and reading the paper and having multiple scenarios run through my mind while I'm reading a patent, for example, whereby my mind is accessing things that I've read or inferences that I've had from other readings or other concepts, general concepts that are all simultaneously kind of tying together and being smashed up against whatever it is I'm looking at in the moment. And having it make sense instantaneously sometimes, other times not making any sense at all, driving me into what I perceive in the moment as a point of distraction where I have to put everything down and go do something else to shift my focus somewhere else. And then when I'm doing something else, it all just click, falls into place where it makes sense. And then I have another layer as it relates to my understanding at the time of my research, what I'm doing, which then takes me into other directions in my research. And it's one layer at a time. And this general idea, what they're trying to get at here is, I believe it's a very real thing. And what they're talking about here, this gateway method, gateway experience, is like a militarized version of it, whereby it's super formalized training that allow people to literally sit down, strap in, meditate, jack into the universal matrix, do something, come back and report on it. And all I'm saying is that when I'm reading this, I see similar correlations to some of my own personal experiences with my own research. And it has to do, I think, with anything. If you're intensely focused on something for any period of time, I think this happens to you. If you're intensely passionate about something and you focus a lot of time on it in a meaningful way, I think this happens to you. I remember hearing stories that my father told me about work he was doing. And he would work and work and work and try to figure out programming code, this, that, and the other. And he'd get to a point where he couldn't figure it out. And while he was asleep, 2, 3, 4 hours into sleep, he would literally have the solution come to him while he was sleeping. And he would get up and he would go work on it, and it would work. And I remember my mom getting all pissed off. What are you doing? Why are you up working? And it's because he understood that that moment was important. And he needed to seize that moment. Otherwise, it would pass and he would not get that moment back. I don't really think he understood what was happening, other than to some extent he knew that he was working on a problem, even if it was in his sleep. And this happens to a lot of us when you dream about what it is that's going on in your life. That's why dream interpretation, I think, has some merit, because there's something that happens when your consciousness goes to sleep, when you are not conscious, when you are in dreamland and your subconscious sort of takes control or takes a primary role. Let's continue. Patterning. This technique involves the use of the consciousness to achieve desired objectives in the physical, emotional, or intellectual sphere. It involves concentration on the desired objective while in a focus 12 state, extension of the individual's perception of that objective into the whole expanded consciousness and its projection into the universe, with the intention that the desired objective is already a matter of established achievement, which is destined to be realized within the time frame specified. This particular methodology is based on the belief that the thought patterns generated by our consciousness in a state of expanded awareness create holograms, which represent the situation we desire to bring about, and in so doing, establish the basis for actual realization of that goal. Once the thought-generated hologram of the sought-after objective is established in the universe, it becomes an aspect of reality which interacts with the universal hologram to bring about the desired objective, which might not, under other circumstances, ever occur. In other words, the technique of patterning recognizes the fact that since consciousness is the source of all reality, our thoughts have the power to influence the development of reality in space-time as it applies to us, if those thoughts can be projected with adequate intensity. However, the more complicated the objective sought, and the more radically it departs from our current reality, the more time the universal hologram will need to reorient our reality sphere to accommodate our desires. Monroe trainers caution against attempting to force the pace of this process, because the individual could succeed in dislocating his existing reality with drastic consequences. What does that mean? So your thoughts mean something. Your thoughts are actually tangible. I need to find my book. I wrote something down in it. I don't think I have it with me. Hang on. All right, so I went through training once upon a time at this company that I used to work for that didn't like me very much after I expressed concerns about 5G. But when I was there, they sent me through training, and something just occurred to me that I want to reference and share with you. And if I can find it, I will share it with you. I found it. Here it is. So I'm gonna give you a couple words. You can reorient them however you want. But what I wrote down here, this lady who presented this class, they dubbed it Elite Manager Training. So for those of you out there that know what that means, congratulations. It's a company-specific course or class. It's a 4-week intensive management / leadership training curriculum. Anyway, here they are. It's words become thoughts, becomes actions, becomes habits, becomes character. And so I remember this very well. When I wrote this down, she said it in this order: words become thoughts, become actions, become habits, become character. And I considered to myself, well, you have to think about what you want to say before you say it. And so it's a matter of perception. If you hear somebody else's words, those words become thoughts because you're translating what's being said, you're hearing it, and then it becomes a thought in your mind. Potentially to become an action if you're being told what to do or you're choosing to follow, right? Become habits, become character. And what this is really dancing around, as it was presented to me, it was leadership training. So it's this idea of how to be a leader. The words you say impart thoughts upon others, which induce them to take some action, and repeated actions become habits, which then form somebody's character. And that's the way it was presented. But what we're looking at here is this idea of consciousness, your thoughts, actually being something tangible in this paper, and that consciousness is the source of all reality. Our thoughts have the power to influence the development of reality in space-time as it applies to us. If those thoughts can be projected with adequate intensity. So it goes back to what I was saying earlier about if you're passionate about something, or if you focus on something for a long enough period of time, it manifests, or you make some progress towards whatever it is you're endeavoring to do. So the other way to read these words is in this order. Your thoughts become words, become actions, which then become habits, which then make up your character. So all of that said, be mindful of your thoughts, not to steal a line from Star Wars. Be mindful of your thoughts because they matter, because they potentially become matter. And it makes one consider what it is the technocracy is after, when in fact consciousness is the source of all reality, and that our thoughts, because we can perceive our own consciousness, have the power to influence the development of reality in space-time as it applies to us, if they can be projected with adequate intensity. Why the homogenized news cycles? Why the perverted projection of ugliness that is proliferated throughout, let's just say, Hollywood? Because that consists of movies, television shows, music. And it's this idea of injecting words or injecting images or concepts into our consciousness, which become thoughts, which then become actions, which then become habits, which then make up our character. And these things dictate and control the outcome of our reality because they become seared into our consciousness. And consciousness is the source of all reality. And our thoughts, which are being manipulated, have the power to influence the development of reality in time and space as it applies to us. Let's move forward. Color breathing. The next technique is called color breathing, and is designed to be used to the expanded awareness and highly focused attentiveness associated with the Focus 12 state, to imagine various colors in a particularly intense and vivid manner so as to use them to resonate with and in turn to activate the body's own energies, visualizing color. Fundamentally, in terms of practical application, it is a healing technique which is designed to restore the body and to enhance its physical capabilities by balancing, revitalizing, and retuning bodily energy flows. It is predicated on the principle that the body's electromagnetic field is capable of altering its resonance patterns so as to entrain energy from the Earth's electrostatic field for its own use. The various colors envisaged in the imagination as part of the technique cue the mind as to which frequencies and what specific amplitudes are desired in connection with this entrainment and the subsequent alterations in bodily energy flow patterns. That color has the capacity to affect the human mind is well known, and the effectuality of color in certain kinds of healing is a demonstrable fact. For example, application of an intense blue light to an area of physical tumescence leads to a relatively rapid and easily observable reduction in the swelling, while red, and to a lesser extent yellow, have quite the opposite effect. However, in the Hemi-Sync application of the technique, external light sources are not involved, but rather the mind. The mind is the sole agent of healing and revitalization. So they're talking about tapping into the universal energy field and using visualization techniques to promote healing of self or potentially of others, because we have this idea of quantum mechanics of being able to tie into this universal field whereby you have entanglement. What does prayer for other people do? What is that? Is that this? Is it this idea of using your consciousness in a focused, meaningful way, blending the mind and the heart and projecting out to heaven, so to speak? Something for somebody else. And this idea that our consciousness manifests our reality in time and space as it affects us, and that we are in fact entangled, all of us, because we're all tied into the same universal field, the absolute. And this idea that visualization in the example they provided, this color breathing, to extract energy out of the electric field that exists, the Earth's electric field, in order to influence our own body's electromagnetic field. Healing technique, which is designed to restore the body to enhance its physical capabilities by balancing, revitalizing, and retuning bodily energy flows. It's predicated on the principle that the body's electromagnetic field is capable of altering its resonance so as to entrain energy from the Earth's electrostatic field for its own use. Sounds kind of Tesla-ish, doesn't it? Only it's happening with your own organic meat suit under the control of your consciousness. Because that's all we are. Complex energy fields that are confined by other energy fields, so dense when compared to light, even though we are just that. We are light. We are no different. Our energy matrix is what is different. Fundamentally, though, we are the same exact thing. It's just that the matrix, our energy matrix, when I say that, our structure, the lattice, the overlapping, the fields that interact with each other, they are different. The energy bar tool. Magic wands and enchanted scepters have been part of the folklore and occult practices for many cultures. The scepters, staffs, and maces carried by monarchs and high priests alike occur with such frequency in the history of bygone eras as to suggest that at the very least, these items are aspects of some type of archetypal symbol which the human mind seems to appreciate, perhaps quite subliminally. In any case, the energy bar tool technique involves envisaging small, intensely pulsating dot of light, which the participant charges in his imagination with enormous energy until it is virtually pulsating. The participant then extrudes the dot into the shape of a sparkling, vibrating cylinder of energy, which he then uses to channel force from the universe to selected parts of his body for purposes of healing and revitalization. Remote viewing. In addition, the energy bar tool is used as a portal for initiating a follow-on technique called remote viewing. In this context, the participant turns his bar of energy into a whirling vortex through which he sends his imagination in search of new and illuminating insights. The apparent purpose of this symbolism involved in a vortex seems to be the cue to the subconscious and convey to it instructions as to what the participant wishes to do, but in terms of nonverbal symbols, which the right hemisphere of the mind is capable of understanding. Living body map. This technique provides amplification for application of the energy bar tool as a means of healing specific areas or systems of the human body. The configuration of the participant's body is imagined, and then the various major systems, such as the nervous and circulatory systems, are envisaged in appropriate colors within the confines of the outline being held in imagination. The energy bar tool is then applied to energizing, balancing, and healing in whatever manner the participant desires. In the process, the participant visualizes various streams of colored energy flowing out of the tool into the organ system or area upon which the revitalizing or healing application is being made. Since colors are the result of differing wavelengths of light, which is to say energy at various frequencies, this technique operates on the assumption that as the human body is composed of energy, it can be vitalized and healed through the additive application of additional energy, provided the energy is applied in the appropriate form. Focus 15, travel into the past. All of the preceding techniques are conducted at the level of expanded awareness known as Focus 12. However, the technique of time travel into the past involves further expansion of consciousness through the inclusion of additional levels of sound on the Hemi-Sync tapes. Some of the sound is probably merely an intensification of the basic Hemi-Sync frequencies, being designed to further modify brainwave frequencies and amplitude. Other aspects of the added sound patterns appear to be designed to provide subtle, almost subliminal suggestions in the mind as to what is desired by way of further expanded consciousness, so as to support the verbal suggestion and instructions also contained on the tape. Even the instructions are highly symbolic, with time being visualized as a huge wheel in the universe with various spokes, each of which give access to a different part of the participant's past. Focus 15 is a very advanced state and is extremely difficult to achieve. Probably less than 5% of all participants in any given gateway experience actually fully achieve the Focus 15 state during the course of the approximately 7 days of training. Nonetheless, Monroe Institute trainers affirm that with enough practice, eventually Focus 15 can be achieved. They also state that not only the individual's past history is available for examination by one who has achieved Focus 15, but other aspects of the past with which the individual himself has no connection may also be accessed. Focus 21, the future. The last and most advanced of all the focus states associated with the Gateway Training Program involves movement outside of the boundaries of time-space, as in Focus 15, but with attention to discovering the future rather than the past. The individual who has achieved this state has reached a truly advanced level. Except in unusual circumstances, it is probably not attainable except by those who have conditioned themselves through long application of meditation, or by those who have practiced long and hard through use of the Hemi-Sync tapes for a period of months, if not years. The out-of-body movement. This is a remarkable phenomenon that has been saved for discussion in detail until the last, because the interest which it occasions and special circumstances involved in its attainment. Monroe Institute stresses that the Gateway Program was not established solely for the purpose of enabling participants to obtain the out-of-body state, nor does the program guarantee that most participants will succeed in doing it during the course of the training at the Institute. Only one tape out of the many which make up the Gateway experience is devoted to the techniques involved in the out-of-body movement. Basically, these techniques are merely designed to make it easier for the individual to achieve the out-of-body state when his brainwave pattern and personal energy levels have reached a point that he is in apparent harmony with his surrounding electromagnetic environment, such that he feels that he has reached the threshold where separation is a possibility. To facilitate achieving out-of-body state, Bob Monroe, the founder of the Monroe Institute, is quoted in a recent magazine article saying that in order to assist the participant, the particular Hemi-Sync tape concerned with the technique employs beta signals of around 2,000 877.3 cycles per second. Since 30 to 40 cycles per second is considered to be the normal range for beta brainwave signals, those associated with the wakeful state, it is apparent that the Monroe Institute is convinced that the same heightened state of brainwave frequencies output which promote altered state of consciousness is also important as a consideration in assisting in achievement of out-of-body states. The actual techniques employed for separating from the body involve such simple maneuvers as rolling out, lifting out after the fashion of a telephone pole, wherein the individual separates in a rigid, head-first manner, such that he finds himself standing at attention at the foot of his physical body, and then sliding out through either end of his body. Role of REM sleep. It is interesting to note that Bob Monroe informed the Gateway class that finished 7 May 1983 that an ex-trainer of his operating in Charlottesville, Virginia, found that he could guarantee out-of-body movements by bringing participants down into a rapid eye movement state of sleep, REM state, and then use Hemi-Sync tape techniques. This may well be a function of the fact that most, if not all people, reputedly go into an out-of-body state during REM sleep. REM sleep is the deepest possible level of ordinary sleep that involves complete disengagement of the body's motor cortex functions from the neck down and nearly complete suppression of consciousness in the left brain hemisphere. The effect of this is to put the body in a state of complete stillness so far as the skeletal muscle structure is concerned, thereby further promoting the state of deep rest needed to eliminate the bifurcation echo. In addition, it leaves the right hemisphere of the brain free to respond to the instructions and suggestions contained in the Gateway tape. However, use of the Hemi-Sync tapes at this point may be less a factor in actually achieving the out-of-body state than it is a matter of focusing the brain enough so that the residual memory of having naturally achieved an out-of-body state is carried into the waking state. Indeed, it may even be postulated that some dreams associated with deep levels of sleep are in fact functions of the same kind of altered consciousness involved in interaction with the universe that plays a role in all of the focus 12, 15, and 21 states described above. The difference between those states and the condition of the mind in REM sleep seems to be that the left hemisphere is almost totally disengaged in the latter experience, such that the memory of what was achieved in the altered states of consciousness cannot usually be retrieved by conscious desire because the left hemisphere has no knowledge of its existence or its location in the right hemisphere. Admittedly, some people can be trained to remember their REM state dreams through intense conditioning in the waking state, but even that may be more a function of establishing pathways in the right hemisphere which the left hemisphere can access following re-entry into a wakeful state than it is an indication of any specific left hemisphere conscious involvement in the process during REM sleep. In any event, the three apparent conditions required for voluntarily inducing an out-of-body state in most individuals seem to be achievement of a state of profound quiet in the body such that the bifurcation echo fades and resonance at approximately 7 Hertz is established, synchronization of the two brain hemisphere wave patterns, and subsequent stimulation of the right hemisphere of the mind to attain a state of heightened alertness, which of course interferes with the brain hemisphere synchronization, but not until a sufficient level of enhanced frequency range has first been established to help achieve the out-of-body state. Jesus. We got to keep going. Just imagine what they can do with your cell phone next to your head on your nightstand, or the electrical wiring in your home tied into a smart meter while you're in REM state. Makes you wonder what's going on. Anyway, I'm digressing. So 33, information collection potential. The information acquisition potential associated with the out-of-body state seems to attract the most attention from the standpoint of developing practical applications for the gateway technique. Unfortunately, although the out-of-body state can apparently be achieved by many people without excessive expenditure of time or effort, the purposes to which it can be put are currently limited by the fact that although individuals in that state may travel anywhere on an instantaneous basis in either the terrestrial or in other spheres, information distortion in the former context remains a major concern. To date, according to one of the trainers at Monroe Institute, numerous experiments have been conducted involving persons moving from one coast to the other in out-of-body state to read a series of 10 computer-generated numbers in a university laboratory. Although most have acquired enough of the digits to make clear their consciousness was present, none have ever succeeded in getting all 10 correct. This seems to be a function of the fact that the physical reality in the present is not the only holographic influence which the individual may encounter in an out-of-body state. Whoa. There are also energy patterns left by people or events occurring at the same physical site being viewed, but from the past rather than the present. In addition, since thoughts are the product of energy patterns, and energy patterns are reality, it may also be possible that the individuals encounter thought forms while in an out-of-body state which mingle with physical reality and are not easily differentiated. Finally, as Melissa Jaeger writes, there is another potential problem area in the sense that holograms can be viewed pseudoscopically, that is to say, inside out or backwards, just as well as they can be seen in proper perspective. Some of the distortions occurring may ultimately prove to be traceable to this cause because the out-of-body state an individual may perceive the holographic energy pattern given off by people or things interacting in time-space reality in a somewhat distorted form. Belief system considerations. In 1967, Alexander David Neal and Yama Yongden wrote a book entitled Secret Oral Teachings in Tibetan Buddhist Sects, from which the following quotes were taken. "The tangible world is movement, say the masters, not a collection of moving objects, but movement itself. There are no objects in movement. It is the movement which constitutes the objects which appear to us. They are nothing but movement. Do not try and bend the spoon, that's impossible. Only try to realize the truth. There is no spoon." This movement is a continued and infinitely rapid succession of flashes of energy, in Tibetan, sal or shug. All objects perceptible to our senses, all phenomena of whatever kind and whatever aspect they may assume, are constituted by a rapid succession of instantaneous events. The classic description of the universal hologram is to be found in a Hindu sutra, which says, "In the heaven of Indra, there is said to be a network of pearls so arranged that if you look at one, you see all the others reflected in it." This is dated 1983. 1983. This document was published in 1983. I've cited this quotation because it shows that the concept of the universe, which at least some physicists are now coming to accept, is identical in its essential aspects with the one known to the learned elite in selected civilizations and the cultures of high attainment in the ancient world. The concept of the cosmic egg, for example, is well known to scholars familiar with the ancient writings of the Eastern religions, nor are the theories presented in this paper at variance with the essential tenets of the Judeo-Christian stream of thought. The concept of visible reality, the created world, as being an emanation of an omnipotent and omniscient divinity who is completely unknowable in its primary state of being. The absolute at rest in infinity is a concept straight out of Hebrew mystical philosophy. Even the Christian concept of the Trinity shines through the description of the absolute as presented in this paper. The description of energy totally at rest in infinity fits the Christian metaphysical concept of the Father, while the infinite self-consciousness resident in that energy providing the motive force of will to bring a portion of that energy into motion to create reality corresponds with the Son. This is so because in order to attain self-consciousness, the consciousness of the absolute must project a hologram of itself and then perceive it. That hologram is a mirror image of the absolute in infinity, still exists outside of time and space, but is one step removed from the absolute and is the actual agent of all creation and all reality. And the eternal thoughts or concept of self, which result from this self-consciousness, serves. Looks like it was, page has been removed or something. We're at 11:55. Motivational aspect. It is a step-by-step procedure which involves repetitive practice of the techniques concerned, using each new insight as a means of penetrating farther during the next practice session. But the rate of progress is so much faster with the gateway approach than it is with transcendental meditation or with other forms of mental self-discipline, and its horizons seem to be so much wider than the discipline needed to practice it would seem to be within the means of even the impatient, result-oriented, skeptical pragmatist of our society. Unlike yoga and other forms of Eastern mental discipline, gateway does not require the infinite patience and total personal subservience to a faith in a system of discipline designed to absorb all the individual's energies over most of a lifetime. Rather, it will begin to produce at least minimal results within the relatively short time, such that enough feedback is available to motivate and energize the individual to continue working on it. Indeed, the speed with which an individual may expect to progress seems less a function of the number of hours spent practicing than it is a question of the speed at which he or she is able to use the insights gained to release anxieties and stresses within the body, within both the mind and the body. These points of energy blockages seem to provide the principal barriers to achieving the enhanced energy states and focus of mind needed for rapid progression. The more compulsive, the more uptight the individual may be at the outset, the more barriers he or she will initially encounter to achieving a deep or immediate experience. But as the insights begin to come and the blockages begin to dissolve, the way ahead becomes increasingly clear, and the value of gateway moves from the status of a matter of intellectual assessment to one of personal experience. Conclusion. There is a sound rational basis in terms of physical science parameters for considering gateway to be plausible in terms of its essential objectives. Institutional insights of not only personal, but of practical and professional nature would seem to be within the bounds of reasonable expectations. However, a phased approach for entering the gateway experience in an accelerated mode would seem to be required if the time needed to reach advanced states of altered consciousness is to be brought within a more manageable limits from the standpoint of establishing an organization-wide exploitation of gateway's potential. The most promising approach suggested in the foregoing study involves the following steps. Begin by using the gateway Hemi-Sync tapes to achieve enhanced brain focus and to induce hemisphere synchronization. Then add strong REM sleep frequencies to induce left brain quiescence and deep physical relaxation. Provide hypnotic suggestion designed to enable an individual to induce deep auto-hypnotic states at will. Use auto-hypnotic suggestion to attain much enhanced focus of concentration and motivation in rapidly progressing through Focus 12 exercises. Then repeat steps A and B following the use of auto-hypnotic suggestion that an out-of-body movement will occur and be remembered. Repeat step E to achieve facility in gaining out-of-body state under conscious control. Alter hypnotic suggestions to stress ability to consciously control out-of-body movement and maintain it even after REM sleep state ends. Approach focus 15 and 21 objectives, escape from time and space and interact with new dimensions from the out-of-body perspective. Use multi-focus approach to solve problems of disorientation and terrestrial information gathering trips. This approach involves the use of 3 individuals in the out-of-body state, one viewing the target object there in time and space, one viewing it at focus 15 as it slips into an immediate past, and one viewing it at focus 21 as it slips from the immediate future. Damn. Debrief all 3 and compare data gathered from the 3 points of view. If care is taken to ensure that the 3 all go out of body together in the same environment, their consciousness energy system should resonate in a sympathetic oscillation. They can tune in to the same target on different planes, different dimensions, with greater effectiveness. Encourage pursuit of full self-knowledge by all individuals involved in the foregoing experiments to enhance objectivity in the out-of-body observation and thinking, and to remove personal energy blockages likely to retard rapid progression. Be intellectually prepared to react to possible encounters with intelligent, non-corporeal energy forms when time-space boundaries are exceeded. Whoa. Whoa. Arrange to have groups of people in Focus 12 state unite their altered consciousness to build holographic patterns around sensitive areas to repulse possible unwanted out-of-body presences. Dude, think about what battle formations look like in interdimensional contact. You have groups of people running like a blocking screen in a football play so that the running back or the quarterback can perform some function to score a freaking touchdown. That's what I'm reading out of this. Arrange to have groups of people in Focus 12 state unite their altered consciousness to build holographic patterns, force fields, around sensitive areas to repulse possible unwanted out-of-body presences, which was K, that followed J, and I'll read J again. Be intellectually prepared to react to the possible encounters with intelligent, non-corporeal energy forms, intelligent forms of energy when time-space boundaries are exceeded. Encourage more advanced gateway participants to build holographic patterns of successful attainment and rapid progress for advanced colleagues to assist them in processing through the gateway system. If these experiments are carried through, it is to be hoped that we will truly find a gateway to gateway and to the realm of practical application for the whole system of techniques which comprise it. And we have the bibliography. And that is the end of the gateway experience.